Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good night, wherever you are dialing from. My name is Mark Scott. I'm a senior resident fellow at the Atlantic Council's Digital Forensic Lab. Welcome to our discussion with Věra Jourová, current European Commission Vice President for Values and Transparency. The Vice President has been at the forefront of the European Union's decade-long push into digital policy, including her prominent role around the bloc's world-setting privacy regime, and most recently, her leading position in how the European Union has combated the threat of foreign interference and disinformation. Over the last 2 years, that effort has included two new digital rulemakings. The Digital Services Act, or new legislation requiring some of the world's largest social media companies to take a more active effort in combating online hate speech and disinformation, and the Code of Practice on Disinformation, or a voluntary mechanism aimed at boosting these platforms' transparency and accountability around disinformation. The European Commission has just published an analysis about how 4 components, disinformation, foreign interference, artificial intelligence, and cyber attacks, may have affected the European parliamentary elections in June. It represents a comprehensive assessment of these threats and how the affected the election that spanned the EU's 27 countries. Now, I'm going to start off with the good news. Based on this assessment, which we're about to talk about, the EU determined that these 4 elements did not have a meaningful or substantial effect on the June election. So we can all sort of at least breathe a sigh of relief. But the analysis also demonstrated that the levels of disinformation and foreign interference have hit record highs, and not just in the European Union. Foreign actors and political parties used AI tools in their political campaigns, and we saw high levels of disinformation and disinformation and foreign interference affecting all the countries. The Vice President was at the center of Europe's response to these threats. As part of that, she conducted a democracy tour across the 27 countries, and also, I believe you visited the United States to understand what was happening on the ground. Madam Vice President, welcome to the Atlantic Council.
Thank you very much, Mark, and good afternoon from Brussels.
So there's a lot I want to go over in the next 30 minutes, so please forgive me. But I want to start off with this democracy tour that you did, because I think it's a key example of the EU parliamentary election isn't just one election. It is technically 27 elections going on all at once. It's a logistical nightmare. So I want to ask you, just to get off before we get into some of the assessment, can you explain some of the differences that you saw on your tour in how countries approach the online information space? And what similarities did you see, and what differences between the countries?
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, the European elections might be taken as a logistical nightmare, but also as the biggest festival of democracy and the biggest organization, because indeed the elections were organized in 27 member states. And so we had to take lesson from the past recorded and detected attack on different elections. I would like to refer, first of all, to Cambridge Analytica case and a lot of cyber attacks on electoral infrastructure, and of course very coordinated and sometimes very successful disinformation campaigns, and newly usage of AI in order to mislead the voters. So to organize free and fair elections is not business as usual anymore. That's why I was traveling from state to state, and I was alarming the organizers of the elections, but also the relevant ministers, media boards as well, with a very clear message: please get ready for the last few weeks of the campaign, because we expect the appearance of the new threats and risks which might have impact on the elections. Now we know that all these things were happening and used, but they didn't have the potential to overturn the results of the elections. The main producer of attacks is Russia. It's our main enemy at this moment. And so we have to count with the strategy of Russia that they are addressing or somehow overflooding information space in all the member states with different intensity. And here comes, coming back to your question, the very simplified analysis that we have three kinds of states. Because the disinformation campaigns and AI abused for spreading disinformation can be successful in the states where there is fertile ground for it, fertile soil. And here comes my three categories. We have some states which have some kind of, yes, limited but still sympathy to Russia. It's given by the proximity of the language, cultural habits, some kind of rather feelings than rational approach. Then we have states which have antipathy. And then we have states which have no experience with the Russian soldiers on their territory. So here the last category is more the Western countries and those who have some kind of bigger resilience against the Russian propaganda and narratives. I would say it's mainly Poland. It's also my country, Czechia, some other Eastern countries, while some kind of sympathy we see in Slovakia, Serbia, and we have to count with it that Russia is a world champion in reading the atmosphere in different states and in targeting the narratives so that to hit the Achilles heel, the vulnerabilities of each member state. So this is what we all saw. So we saw the narratives which were covering the whole European Union. The main one was that the elections will be manipulated. And then we had sector-specific narratives used in more than one member state, and it was always climate change, EU unable to act, migrants, minorities, Middle East war, and Ukraine. And then there were country-specific narratives, which one example was the narrative about France not being able to organize the Olympic Games in a secure manner. Yeah, so what we see is a very sophisticated approach, good reading of our minds and souls, of our possible emotional reactions, because all the disinformation narratives just play with our emotions. I always advise the people who ask me how to recognize disinformation. Normal citizens ask me, and I say, if you feel that your blood pressure is going up, check it, what you read. So this was all proven before the elections, and our assessment shows also that Russia is very smart in doing things in efficient way. So when you look at the most serious attacks which we saw, it was always in big countries, because the big countries sent the biggest number of members of the parliament to Strasbourg, you know? So it was France, it was Poland, it was Germany. Also, we saw increased intensity in Italy and Spain. What I want to say, the European elections are a special electoral exercise, if I may use these words. But it is obvious that we have to get ready for the national parliamentary elections. Russia needs to have as many as possible country leaders being on their side. Country leaders which will stop the support for Ukraine. So we know very well the motive of our enemy. And so our assessment serves as the warning for all the next elections, maybe wherever they are, be it in Europe or somewhere else. And I think that it's quite a useful piece of work which helps us understand how our enemies are abusing the information space.
So I'm not typically one who's that optimistic, but when I read the assessment from you and your colleagues, I was at least positive with that disinformation and foreign interference did not have a meaningful effect on the outcome. Why do you think that is? Is it really because it didn't? or we just don't know what we don't know, to misuse a Donald Rumsfeld quote, in that we don't really know how far and effective the disinformation and foreign interference went. Why do you think the campaigns, which were quite sophisticated, what we'll get into, didn't have the effect that many did think they would?
Of course, we don't know what we don't know, and it's. I'm very often reminding myself that I know that I don't know, which is, I think, old philosophical question. I think that the assessment shows that there were incidents. We unfortunately cannot measure the impact of those incidents. So what we know now is that they did not have that strength or potential to disrupt the electoral system, or to, I don't know, to discourage the people from casting their vote, by the narrative that the elections are going to be manipulated. So there were incidents, they didn't have big impact. As I said, we will see more of it. I think that in the national elections coming in the next and year after, I think that also in these future elections, we will see more the phenomenon which we detected now, that there was a combination or mixture of all three methods: disinformation, AI, and cyber attacks. And I think that the good thing is, I try to be positive today. The good thing is that we stopped underestimating the foreign influence. And also, I think it was clearly said by Ursula von der Leyen, who set already the political program for the future, that she said that we need democracy shield, which obviously will be much broader than compared with what we are doing now, because I mentioned three threats: disinformation, cyber attacks, and AI usage. But the foreign interference is much wider range of attacks and channels of influence. And here we speak about bribery, about the elite capture, about hidden financing. For instance, hidden financing of the influencers who are becoming political actors without any rules. It's something we have to think about. We have to think about sabotages. We have to think about the usage of spywares. So there is a lot of new ways of foreign interference. And here for the EU, there is a clear message. We have to do things against it together. Because when I named those threats, for some of them, it is the case for the member states to deal with them. But big portion of these risks are the job for the common European effort for the institutions. So for the foreign interference, it's a typical situation when the EU will have to work with the member states, with their secret services, with their security bodies, and with NATO, because they have a good detection of data as well. And I would like to see more in our member states to have specialized institutions to be able to detect the foreign interference in all, in the whole of it, all those new threats which I named. We have two good examples. We have in France the agency Viginum, which is focusing on foreign interference through online. They are doing a great job. And the second is the Psychological Defense Agency in Stockholm. So we see some new institutions being established in the member states, and they can serve as a good example for other member states. Because I think I said at the beginning that the focus on Russia differs from state to state. They want to be efficient, so they want to see the result. So they are not investing so much in the countries like Finland, where the society is quite resilient. They lived next to Soviet Union decades, so they can very well differentiate and recognize the pro-Russian narratives and the rest. But we we see gaps in many other member states. So I think that the new Commission will invest itself in democracy shield, concrete things, maybe legislation, but we will also have to push the member states to do more.
Yes, I agree. Russia, and to a lesser degree, China, has a significant role to play. But a lot of the things we are seeing are coming from domestic actors, some of which may or may not be tied to a foreign government, but many are local. How do you deal with that potential threat? No one is saying we want to create a Ministry of Truth to determine what people can and can't say online. But there is a legitimate threat in terms of domestic actors playing into foreign narratives or promoting them for their own purposes. So from your perspective, how do you balance the need to combat against the legitimate threat, but also allowing people to say things, even things we don't?
Yeah, this is the most difficult thing on the whole agenda of foreign interference and disinformation, because if we limit only our actions on the basis of the knowledge that it's mainly Russia, but of course also it's China and Iran maybe. And if we only limit the action vis-a-vis the digital platforms, we cannot be successful, because not all the disinformation campaigns have been produced in Russia. We have our very agile domestic production. And we see from the data that Russian narratives or pro-Russian narratives produced in the EU are, of course, stronger as for the impact on the society when they are represented and spread by the domestic strong political powers. So again, we have categories of member states where in some member states these pro-Russian political forces are still outside the political sphere. But they are on the social media, but they are outside the institutions. We have states where they are already in the parliaments. And unfortunately, we have states where we hear the pro-Russian narratives already from the governments. And it is a tricky situation which can be healed only by better communication and pre-bunking. I am big promoter of change, of the radical change of the way we communicate. Because I said to you that the narratives are always touching or somehow affecting the vulnerable spots. All the narratives were predictable from the past. And the sectors are known. And the topics are very easy to predict. So we should, when I say we, I mean still the Liberal Democrats who, I hope, want to live in the society which recognizes the evidence-based truth. So when I say we, I mean those who are in majority, leading the vast majority of the member states. Change radically the way of communication using the social platforms, maybe using AI, which is labeled, so that the people see and know that this is produced with the help of AI. We need to do better pre-bunking. We need to invest in campaigning and awareness raising so that the people who are targets of it, whoever is the producer, if it is Kremlin or some capital city or not capital city, the domestic producers, the people, I hope, will be gradually more and more annoyed that they are manipulated and that they might be more engaged in fact-checking or finding a more trustworthy and reliable sources. We need to do more to strengthen the role and position of these trustworthy sources. And here I speak about media. We have the Media Freedom Act now, which is strongly supporting the idea that in each member state there must be very professional, well-funded public service media. where the people can find fact-checked information. At this moment, just imagine if we don't have the public service media, if we have very narrow and badly financed sphere of commercial media, if we have in the country a strong impact of TikTok and YouTube and other platforms, if we have in the governments those who want to just to capture the media, the citizens then can be easy targets of manipulation. And this is not a good news if it is that easy to decrease the probability of truly autonomous vote of the people.
I think you mentioned Finland before, and I think both Finland and the Baltics have done a pretty good job over the decades of inoculating their citizens against this threat, both foreign and domestic. You mentioned the Media Freedom Act. One thing I do in my job now at the Atlantic Council is do a lot with EU regulation, specifically the Digital Services Act. And when I get a lot of questions in my job is, how's it going? And I don't get to speak to people who actually help write the thing and implement it. So I'm going to ask you that question, particularly in reference to its effects in inoculating the European parliamentary elections against disinformation and foreign interference. Do you think currently under the DSA, the platforms are doing enough and are working sufficiently to meet their obligations?
We see quite a lot of efforts from most of the platforms, especially those who are under the enforcement of the Commission. Maybe one parameter, those who qualify for the strict attention of the Commission are those who have 45 million users a month and more. Yeah? So it's 1/10 of the population of the EU. Over many years, we worked with the big platforms on the basis of voluntary gentlemen agreements. And I think the platforms knew always what we wanted from them. At least I was always very clear, as well as my colleague Margaret Vestager or Thierry Breton. I think that we were very clear about what we want and what we don't want. We don't want the platforms to spread crime, yeah, like child pornography, terrorism, extremism, and manifestly clear cases of hate speech. So everything which is prohibited by the European laws must not be distributed through the platforms. We mean it that the Digital Services Act should be taken very seriously and the platforms should be compliant. We have several investigations already ongoing. We have the first tangible result, which was the case of TikTok, which on the basis of the dialogue with the enforcers stopped the application of their app, which they called TikTok Lite.
Specifically aimed at kids, mostly.
It went directly against what we want. We want the children to have normal life outside of the digital trap. And this application was catching them and keeping them many hours inside of the digital trap. So, sorry, I am a bit poetic, digital trap, but I don't have better words now for that. And so, indeed, they are, especially those under investigation, are giving us responses, explanations. And I want to emphasize one more thing. I have to appreciate the cooperation with the platforms, but also media, fact-checkers and advertising industry under the code of practice against disinformation. Because this is not, now it's part of the Digital Services Act, but it was also self-standing agreement, which invited a lot of different actors to do the fact-checking and explanations of the content. And the code of practice was created maybe a little bit out of my fear that we must not, following a good purpose, create a monster where some system where somebody concrete would get the official pouvoir to say this is right, this is false. We don't want it. That's why this code of practice tries to initiate a reaction bottom up from the society. And I think that without that, top down only, we cannot have big success.
And that takes on to me my last couple of questions for you. Now that we have the European parliamentary election gone, we had a French election right afterwards. We've had the Moldovan election just passed, just on the cusp of being in the EU. There are other elections this year. We've had India, Bangladesh, United Kingdom, where I'm based. We have the US election coming up on November 5th. What lessons do you think can be taken from Europe's approach to particularly foreign interference and disinformation as other countries look at this? No one is saying what Europe does is right for everyone, but Europe is seen at the forefront of at least digital regulation. So where do you think, what lessons can be taken? And second of all, what can partners do? Many of the people watching this will be based in the United States. There is an effort across, you mentioned NATO, the G7, to work together, because many of these issues are not just based in the EU or in North America, etc. So where do you think there is a way for partners to work more closely together to combat this issue?
Thank you. The lesson we learned is that the threats must not be underestimated. They will be living with us, maybe forever. I don't know, but to organize now elections with 100% certainty that they will be free and fair, it's illusion. This time is over. So that's why the lesson is also for the national elections in the EU. Get ready, prepare the tools, mobilize also the attention of the citizens that they might be manipulated. You know, I will always emphasize the role of the citizens, because otherwise we just speak about some top-down arrangements, which I've mentioned before. These lessons, I think, are applicable in all other countries which want to keep democracy. Because free and fair elections are absolutely basic parameter of democratic system. And our enemies, be it Russia or China, they hate democratic systems because, you know, I always imagine Vladimir Putin, how happy he would be to have 27 telephone numbers to 27 leaders, to ring them. Hey, I don't know who, I will not name anyone. Stop the support of Ukraine, stop sending weapons. Maybe he would add some of the horrible narratives which depict Ukrainians as Nazis. Stop it, because we have a good deal for you. We will sell you cheap gas, for instance. Can you imagine such a phone call? It's impossible in democratic countries, because in democratic countries the leaders have to ask the citizens about their opinion. And it's a tough cookie for the autocrats to convince the democrats to help them in their aggression and imperialistic politics. So these are the lessons. We made our report publicly available, and my message would be: do not estimate all those risks which we covered, but also many others. What should the partners do? I think I indicated not to underestimate the new threats and new risks, maybe to deploy enough fantasy, because I can tell you the enemies are very, very innovative. Just look at the doppelganger case. How cheeky it is. They just used the design of the big European media outlets like La Stampa.
Spiegel, I think, yeah.
Also Spiegel. I think that, who else was there? Die Welt, Le Point in France. Well, they are very innovative. So be ready and try to imagine how the information space will be attacked. And the last question was about some international work. I think that the Digital Compact of United Nations already indicates that we should not just let the digital space and digital business demolish the parameters of society which recognizes human rights and so on. It is the international attempt to consolidate the at least the understanding of the risks. I think that wherever I go, be it to United States, I was in Canada recently, I was in Japan or South Korea. I spoke to Australian ministers. They all are asking me about the details, especially of the Digital Services Act, and about the method how we introduce the legally binding rules without introducing censorship. And I always hear quite simplified, ideas that something like Hamlet's question, to remove or not to remove content. We don't think like that. Our system is more sophisticated, but first of all, we needed to balance the extreme power of the digital platforms and push up the responsibility. And so, yeah, the rest of the democratic world is watching with maybe the intention to do similar things. And if it is not democratic world, of course they are as well watching, because we are making it more expensive and more difficult to brainwash our people.
My final question is a bit more personal. I've covered your work since you joined the Commission, I think 8 years ago. 10 years ago, excuse me. And we've gone through multiple iterations of digital rules. I think we discussed the impact of Cambridge Analytica both in 2018 and also in this call. So it's more personal for you. Do you think now in 2024, the information space is protected? Do we know more? Do we know less? How would you assess personally how we're doing in terms of fighting some of these threats?
We know much more. We don't know everything, but we do not underestimate the bad things stemming from the digital revolution. We are not maybe using enough the good things. Again, when I say we, I mean those who are influencing the development in our societies, especially politicians. I was privileged to, how to say it, push my nose into this agenda. Because, of course, 10 years ago, GDPR was fully on my table. Yeah, so it was, in fact, the gate through which I appeared in the middle of the new things and new technologies, which suddenly had the potential to change the way we live and we think and we work and we study. We laugh also, maybe. But over time, so GDPR, I think, it's a good piece of work, and also in this case, it is watched around the globe, and it became the global standard for many. So it's one thing. All the other things, be it the gentleman agreements, the codes, and later the legislation, I really was lucky to have colleagues like Margaret Vestager, who was the digital tsar, yeah? who was the vice president responsible for this agenda. But she was always very willing to listen to me when I said, yes, you have the technologies, you have the business, but I have the people inside of it. Because I am responsible for fundamental rights and partly security and privacy. And so she left the gate open for me, and we were cooperating very well on all that on that agenda. At this moment, we have two lines of work. One is the strictly enforcement line, which was Margaret. It used to be also, of course, Thierry Breton line of work. My line is more to keep the dialogue with the big tech. As always has been from my side, the dialogue. When I tried to explain the powerful men of the planet, main features of the European soul, because I mainly spoke to Americans or people from India, and well, we are special. This is a fantastic continent, having a very complex and bloody history. So it was my task to explain to them also why we have to introduce rules which will decrease the level of hate speech and anti-Semitism, all the other kinds of hate against the minorities, child pornography and terrorist content. It was my job to explain why it's so very much important for us. And I think that if they want to continue the business in the EU, and it's a good business, I think that it is rich continent where they want to continue their work. They understand that they have to comply by our laws. So, but I will be watching this space in the future.
I think you have maybe about a month left before the new commission takes over. So I hope you enjoy your last 4 to 6 weeks in Brussels. And Madam Vice President, thank you for joining us today at the Atlantic Council.
Thank you very much. Have a good day wherever you are. Bye.